Right? This is shouldering the cross. And it's not something that you should ever think that you shouldn't have to do. Because there are times where God has called many people in their lives to do things like this and to be crucified on his behalf, right? There are right now countless men and women of God under severe persecution because they refuse to give up shouldering that cross for Christ. Right? They refuse to give up supporting his mission, his word. There are many men and women right now being killed for this. All right, are you willing to shoulder that cross? All right, so this walk with God is a walk of victory and towards victory, even when it doesn't look like it, feel like it, smell like it, taste like it, or sound like it. And yet, if victory in life and over death is what you seek, it's a walk that needs to be finished. It's not an easy walk, and you will get tired. And many of you probably already are, or have gone through periods of spiritual, mental, and emotional exhaustion and fatigue. But if you want victory over yourself and your life, you need to keep going. Because despite what it looks like, we are marching to a victory that has already been won. And this is our biggest struggle. Who doesn't live this life, walk the things out, wait for the promises, wait for God to open doors and shift things and do this, that, and the other, who doesn't feel like this is a death toll? Right? Every day we're walking in God, we are getting closer to the victory, and yet it feels somehow as if it's getting farther off. Does it not? And that is a false perception that we have allowed to take us over, that the enemy has skillfully and perfectly embedded in us. Right? Because all we see is the cross and we forget about the resurrection. Right? All we see is the blood and the lashes and the this, that, and the other, and we neglect the whole point of it. Right? Today we are still like the disciples, in which, Jesus had to say, you should be happy. And yet we're not happy. Right? Who is ecstatic every day through this thing? And why? Right? Why? The victory has already been won. Right? They should have been more concerned because they still had to wait on it. Right? They still had to wait those 3 days. They still had to wait and see. You don't have to wait and see for anything. There's nothing you have to wait and see for. It's already there. And even though that means you can't obtain it right now, doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean the walk isn't a walk of victory. All right, so Matthew chapter 11, verse 29 and 30, and all of my scripture is very short. It reads, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. All right, we struggle, though, with believing this, because we feel the pressure and the weight of the yoke on us. How can we rest while carrying a yoke? Right? How can we be anything but exhausted when we are going through the trials and tribulations of life with a weight bearing down on us? Whose weight is bearing down on you, though? Right? We understand that Jesus is gentle and lowly in heart, but say to ourselves, this yoke doesn't feel that way. This burden doesn't feel light, when in actuality the burden is light, but the responsibility isn't. And this is why word choice and understanding is so important. This is why the scripture says, right, my people suffer for lack of knowledge. Right? This is why ignorance is the cancer of society and of ourselves. Right? Because what we feel, the weight that is on us is not the burden. It's the responsibility to do what's right in the burden. It's not the burden itself, right? Because the burden is the walk. And let's be honest, the walk is light, right? He asks you to do something, and that's kind of it. Like I've said before, he's not asking us to climb mountains, to dig through valleys. He's not asking you to do anything like that. This isn't like a national treasure kind of thing where we have to solve it and go on this adventure to find this thing, to open this ancient door, and yada, yada, yada. It's not. It's, did you pray today? Right? Have you worshiped? Have you read the Word? Have you spent time with God? When that thing could have upset you, did you let it upset you? Right? Did you walk around feeling this way, that way, the other way? Did you let the enemy distract you with something? Did you believe the enemy's voice over God's voice? Right? That's the burden. And realistically, it's nothing. Especially for us. Like I said before, there are people dying over this right now. There are people in jails over this right now. There are people being starved over this right now. There are people being beaten over this right now. When you compare the two, what are you burdened by? You're burdened by having to find time to pray? Or to choose between entertainment and prayer? Right? You have to choose between turning the TV off a little earlier before you go to bed so that you can read one chapter of the Bible a night. Right? That's the burden. But that's not what weighs you down. It's the responsibility that you're supposed to do that. Right? It's not the act. The act's not difficult. It's just the responsibility of you're supposed to do that. And you know you're supposed to do that. And because you know you're supposed to do that, it feels like a weight, but it's not. You turn the TV off a half an hour earlier if you're a slow reader. Right? Like, it's not much. It's not much. And I actually do have do you have the clicker? Click, clickety, click, clack. Let me just. So I got pictures, okay? So, everybody who's been here for, I guess, around the crucifixion messages and whatnot, you should know about the patibulum and the cross and yada, 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 right? This is the traditional crucifixion setup for Jesus. He didn't have this. He wasn't on one of those, which was a little seat. It was a very uncomfortable seat, but it was a little seat to keep you alive longer so that you suffered longer. But shouldering the cross, right, that's what Jesus carried. It was that patibulum. Okay? That's what he carried. And a yoke, that's a human yoke. Okay? Because there are animal yokes. But that's a human yoke. You see the similarities? All right? This is the yoke. The yoke that we carry is that patibulum. That's what you're shouldering. And I know it feels heavy, because in actuality, if you were actually carrying it, it would be heavy. In actuality, many of you wouldn't be able to carry it, because that would be, I don't know. This little thing is 150, 200 pounds, because it's solid wood. But that would be like a baby-sized cross. So one for you. That crossbar would be very heavy, right? So the responsibility of carrying it is going to feel like a lot. But the burden of it isn't a lot. Galatians chapter 6, verse 4 through 5, but let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load. The yoke, the cross that we bear, we are responsible for. And it is a weighty responsibility, because no one else can bear it for you, and no one else can help you bear it. It's your march, but it's a march to victory. It's not a march to death. Right? Just because you have weight on you doesn't mean it's a march to death. Just because it is a patibulum, right, the crossbar, doesn't mean that it's a march to death. But it's your responsibility to bear that. It's no one else's, right? No one else can pick up your cross for you. You have to carry it yourself. The responsibility of getting that thing to the end point is yours and yours alone. Right? If you want what God has promised you, you got to make it to the end. And I'm not saying make it to the end of your life, because then, you'd be dead, and then what? You get the promises? No. But you have to make it to the end of that road to get that promise. You have to make it to the end of that road to get that next promise. You have to make it to the end of that road to get that deliverance, to get that freedom, to get that breakthrough, to get whatever it is that you claim you want. Right? And this is something that I've said before, because we always say we want something, but it's more of a claim. Because if we did want it, what would stop you from acquiring it? Right? When you really want something, how many of us have gone out of your way to buy some kind of stupid food or stupid thing because you really wanted it? Even though you knew, this is going to add 20 minutes to my travel time, but I really want it. When you really want something, you go after it. Right? You don't stop until you have it. Right? What God has called you to is your responsibility. What God has promised you is your responsibility. And what God has for you is your responsibility. It's no one else's. Right? Everyone can have wisdom enough to tell you how to get there, but no one can get you there. Right? You can have all the strategies, but unless you actually use them, no one can get you there. Right? And these responsibilities that we ourselves bear the load of can be heavy. They can be tiring. And yet that isn't the yoke and burden that is light. Right? The light yoke and the light burden is the cross. That's the light yoke. That is the light burden. And I know, it doesn't look it. Right? It looks pretty uncomfortable. And yet, that is the light thing in life that you can carry. Everything else in comparison is going to be heavy. That is the lightest thing that you can carry is the cross. And that shouldn't surprise anyone because God is a God of reversals. God is a God of opposites. So the thing that looks heavy, the thing that should crush you, the thing you shouldn't be able to bear, the thing you shouldn't be able to carry is the lightest thing in your life. And if you look at your life, you know it's true. Because work is heavy and work is annoying. School's heavy, school's annoying. But oh man, when you come to church and you really want to, ooh, that thing feels light. Right? It feels like a break. It feels like a rest. And yet, when we're not in church, we're acting like we're dying under the load of just the responsibility of, can you just pray? Right? Like I've said many times, this has to be taken as a relationship. If you can't be responsible enough to call somebody that you're in a relationship with, that relationship ain't lasting very long. No one cares about your work schedule, about how much you got to study, about how many chores you got to do, about how you got to run around this, that, and the other. Listen, you better call me while you're in the car or something. But if you think we're going a week without talking, and then you're just going to show up at my house as if we're all good, we're not. And yet we do that to God. Because the responsibility, oh God, it's just so much. I don't know how to dial a phone. Right? As if, Siri, Google, Alexa, whatever other smart things don't dial it for you nowadays. Right? The cross is the yoke that Jesus lays on us. And it's only when we are under the cross that we learn from him. Right? That's what Jesus said. It's not what Scripture says, that's what Jesus says. Or it says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. It's not learn from me and then take my yoke upon you. It's the yoke needs to be upon you first, and then you can learn from me. Right? It's only when you actually show up to work you can find out how to do the job. Right? It's only when you show up to class that you can find out how to do the whatever. It's only when you show up to something that you can find out how to do it or what's going on. It's only when you're under the yoke that you can find out what's going on, that you can find out how to do it. If you're not under it, you're not going to know. And so many times we struggle because we remove ourselves from under it, and then we're like, I don't know what's going on. I can't figure this out. I don't know what to do. Well, if you leave the classroom, of course you're not going to have an idea of what is being taught. You remove yourself from under the yoke, you're not going to know what's going on. You're not going to know spiritually what to do. You're not going to know mentally how to handle yourself. You're not going to know how to do any of these things all over again. And we act all surprised as if you thought you had the knowledge in you because you knew it once. No. You get out from under that yoke, it's like you're going on summer vacation, you're coming back and you're a doofus all over again. Right? Like, let's be completely honest, There's a reason why basically nowhere else in the world has, the 3-month summer vacation. It's because when the kids come back, they don't know anything. They've forgotten everything. Right? This is why most school systems around the world are year-long, and you get, your seasonal breaks, whatever, but they want to make sure you continue knowing what has been taught. Right? It's the same thing in God, except it's a lot faster. Right? It is a lot faster. Maybe you removed yourself under that yoke for a day and you're okay. Don't get cocky. Because that next day, it's all downhill from there. Right? You retain the knowledge enough for a day, but after that, it's just, whoo. You sink fast. You sink fast. Why? Because the weight of everything else starts to crush you. Right? The lightness of the yoke keeps you safe, keeps you smart, and keeps you from being an idiot. But as soon as you get out from under it, there's nothing but downhill from there. Right? It's under the cross where we see his gentleness. Right? It's under the cross where we recognize his humility. It's under the cross where we find rest for our souls. It's under the yoke of the cross where we find that this walk, this march, is easy and light. It's only there. It's nowhere else. You're not going to find it anywhere else. People have been looking for ever. As long as there have been people, they've been looking for something else, and there's nothing else. It's God. Right? It's the cross. It's always been the cross, and it will always be the cross, and there's nothing that is greater than that, because that is where all victory has been obtained. Right? That is where everything was placed into his hands and is now obtainable to you. Nothing outside of it will get you there unless you put yourself under it. Unless you make that march with him, unless you resurrect with him, you're going to die like any other man. Right? You're going to die like any other man, and Jesus is still going to have the same attitude that he had when he spoke to the man. He told him to follow him, and he said, my dad's about to die. Let me stay and bury him. What does he say? Let the dead bury the dead. Right? And he has that same attitude with us. If you want to be dead, the dead are going to bury you. But if you want life, right? If you want life, you choose the cross and you choose death. All right, again, God is a God of reversals. It's not supposed to make logical sense, and yet it does. Just flip everything on its head. All right? Might not seem like it makes sense until you read a book upside down and you're like, I didn't know I could do that. Yeah, you can. Your brain will figure it out. It may not make sense. This walk may not make sense, but you'll figure it out. If and only if. If and only if you're under that cross. Because the same way as you can read a book upside down, as soon as someone gives you a right side up book and you look back at it, upside down book makes no sense anymore. Right? I mean, you can try it with yourself. You got your Bibles, you got your handwritings. You can try it for yourself right now. You'll see I'm not lying. But it's only under the yoke of the cross where we can find all of these things. This peace, this rest, understand who he is. Right? It's only there because that's where he is. Right? It's only there where we can experience all of these things, where we can understand this, because when we are under the yoke of the cross, the weight of the responsibility is non-existent. And why is the weight of the responsibility non-existent? Because when you are under the yoke of the cross, now it goes back to what I've been saying for a long time now. It becomes just a relationship based on love, and love doesn't have responsibilities. When you really love someone, it's not a responsibility to do for them. It's an act of love. When you really love somebody, it's not an issue to be asked to do something. It's not an issue to go out of your way to do something. It's not an issue to make time to do something. It's not an issue to make sure they are pleased with you. It's not an issue, and it's not a responsibility. It's love. But only when we're under there. Only when we're under there. Only when we're under the weight. Only when we're under the cross. Only when we're under the yoke does it stop being a responsibility. And it starts just being love. Because responsibility isn't going to keep you under it. The promises aren't going to keep you under it. I don't care what you've been promised. I don't care if God said, he'll give you $1 trillion bajillion, you're not going to walk this thing out because of the promise. You're not. It doesn't matter how great it is. It doesn't matter how cool it would be. You're not. The only thing that's going to keep you under it is love. If you have it for him. If you have it for him, you'll stay. Because that's where he is. Right? If you have it, that's where you'll be. Right? Everybody who's in love wants to be with the person they're in love with, right? It's where you'd rather be. That's what I'm told. Right? I assume that's where you'd want to be above anywhere else, Even when they're annoying you, it's kind of like, I didn't say you could leave the room. Like, you might be agitating me, but that doesn't mean leave. Like, what are you crazy. Like, you when you're pouting, it's like, you still got to stay. Right? It's love. I know that's love because that's the love I've seen from the parent-child relationship that I have, Might be upset with you, but I'm still going to feed you. Like, I'd be aggravated and agitated, but that doesn't mean I want you to walk out of the house. Like, right? That's love. Right? You might be annoying me, but if you still ask me to do something, I'll do it. That's the only thing that's going to keep you there. Nothing else. Nothing else. Because under the yoke of the cross, our focus isn't on making sure the responsibilities are met. Our focus is on Jesus. And when we focus on Jesus, we meet the responsibilities in this walk out of our love for him. And because it's what we have learned from him. Right? Because again, when you're under there, you're going to learn to do what he does. He didn't do anything out of responsibility towards the Father. He did everything out of love for him. So when you're under there learning from him, what's the first and only thing he's going to teach you? It's to love me. Is because you're going to see him do the things that he did because he loved the Father. Right? It's like I've said before, Jesus didn't die because he loved us. It's because he loved the Father. It's because the Father asked him to, and he loved him, and he said, yeah. Right? You know that. You should know that, because if you read the scripture, in the garden, he prayed that the cup may pass from him. If he loved you so much that he was willing to do this thing for you, he wouldn't ask that he didn't have to do this thing for you. That doesn't mean he doesn't love us. Right? But he loves his Father more. That's why he ended the prayer with, nevertheless, not my will be done, but yours. Right? When we love Jesus, when we set ourselves under that cross, that's the love he's going to teach us to have for him. That's the love he's going to teach us to have for the Father. That's the love he's going to teach us to have for the Spirit. And that's where then it can start trickling out to all those around you. But you're not going to learn it from anywhere else, because no one else on this earth is able to love like that. No one. No parent towards child, no husband and wife. No one loves like that except for God. But that's what we need. That's what we all need to learn. Because if you're going to walk this walk out, you're going to walk it out right, and you're going to walk it out to the end. That's what you need. And unfortunately, it's something that in America is lacking. Right? Let's be honest. As far as the church goes, we're probably the weakest church on earth. Right? Because how many of you would actually be willing to serve God knowing that one day you'll probably be arrested for it. One day you'll probably be beaten for it. One day you'll be starved for it. Right? And you could say, yeah, I would. You think you would. I don't know if you would, because I don't know if I would. I don't know what I can survive. right? Until you're in the situation, you don't know what you can survive. You don't know what you're willing to go through for this thing. But we know that we can go until death because many people are still doing it. But that's a different kind of love. And that, unfortunately, is a love that many of us are greatly lacking. Why? Because we come and we go. Right? We place ourselves under the cross for a period and then we leave. I need him to do this thing in me, so here I am for a week. And then I'm gone for 2 weeks. Right? That doesn't mean, leaving the church and going out and sinning and this, that, and the other, but you know that there's a difference. You know that there's a difference in how you serve God when you really want something, when you really need him to do something, and when you're kind of like, we're cool, and you just let the relationship kind of slide on by. There's a difference, right? There's a difference in your prayer. There's a difference in your worship. There's a difference in how you think. There's a difference in how you see the world. We need to stay there all the time. All the time. Because inevitably, maybe not in our lifetime, but inevitably all the things happening out in the world are going to reach our shores. It's an inevitability. And it should be our responsibility then to train up all of those coming after us, meaning they should be able to build upon your own love. They should be able to build upon your own relationship with God and reach a new level because they're starting from a better position. Right? We have to prepare. We have to prepare ourselves and prepare those to come, even if it's generations off. Right? Even if it's generations off. I want to know that my bloodline can escape when everything hits the fan, right? Can go with the rapture. Woo! We all made it. Right? We all made it because you built a foundation that could support us. Right? It's a foundation that can be built, but it's only possible to be built under that cross. That's the only place that it can be built. Right? Because when we remove ourselves from being under the cross with misery, with doubt, with fear, with sin, with disobedience, with stubbornness, with immaturity, with self-righteousness, with lust, with etc. and etc., we don't learn anything. And not only do we not learn anything, we begin to be crushed. Right? Matthew chapter 14, verse 30, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. Right? Every time we take our focus off of Jesus, we drown. We sink, we're crushed, we're destroyed, we're exhausted, we're fatigued. We succumb to everything that couldn't touch us when we were focused on him and under the yoke of the cross. No surprise. At least it shouldn't be a surprise, and yet we still act as if it is. Yet we constantly and consistently let ourselves be swayed away by focusing on winds that will never cease, in oceans that will never shut up, but instead of maintaining what is already and always working, we let ourselves be swayed to come out from under the cross, either through fear and doubt like Peter, or from the hollow promises and sinful desire. There's not a lot of reasons that we choose to get out from under the cross, and yet we keep choosing the same reasons. And our only proper place and our only proper position is under the yoke of the cross, because that is where we have been called out to be. And now, basically, I'm getting into the actual main verse, but it shouldn't be that long. I don't know who the artist is. Mark chapter 15, verse 21, then they compelled a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus, and he was coming out of the country and passing by to bear his cross. This is why the cross is light. Everything in the Bible is there for a reason. And this Simon, who helped bear Jesus' cross, is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we're going to go through all of them. They're only one verses each, but we're going to go through all of them because this is our walk. This right here, summed up in one verse, is your walk. You've been compelled, you've been called out to bear this cross with him, to help him carry this thing. Everybody is, that old guy. I don't know what he actually looked like, but replace him with you. Right? That's why it's light. That's why it's easy. Because you're not the actual main one carrying it. You're the support. Right? All of us have been compelled to bear the cross of Christ. And when we bear the cross, when we take on his yoke of his, we become up close and personal with our God. All right, because imagine, this is how they would have had him carry it. So the only way you can really support and help is you'd have to get your head right underneath it also, and right next to his. Listen, I know Simon must have left incredibly blessed, because I can only imagine when Jesus is up on the cross still preaching to people, still asking God to forgive him, what he must have been pouring into Simon at that point. And yet that's where he calls you to be. All the time. Right there. Right next to him. Bearing that cross with him. You want to know how you learn? It's because you're that close. You want to know why it's light? Because he's the one actually doing the work. If you're shouldering the cross with Christ, what else could possibly be your focus? Right? When we're cheek to cheek with the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and the Ancient of Days, what else could possibly be more important to you? What else could possibly be more valuable than having the honor of being able to bear his cross? And the answer to that is nothing. These are the definitions. I got definitions. So you can read them. So compelled is angado. It's to employ a courier, dispatch a mounted messenger, press into public service, compel to go. Bear is idle, to raise up, elevate, lift up, to raise from the ground, to take upon oneself and carry what has been raised up, to bear, to take away from another what is his or what is committed to him, to take by force. Right? The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. Right? When we are compelled to serve Christ and to be under his cross, we are to bear this. Some of you have been compelled to serve God. We'll go through the others. But some have been compelled to serve God because the Spirit grabs a hold of you and you're just like, I got to do this thing. All right, sometimes that's how he gets you, but it is what it is. You've still been compelled to bear this cross with him. All right, we are to bear, to take upon ourselves and carry what has already been raised up. And this is why Jesus could say that his yoke is easy and his burden is light, because you aren't carrying the cross. You're moving it with him. Right? You're moving something that's already been raised up. He's already picked up the thing. You just kind of underneath it. That's why it's light. That's why it's easy, because he's still doing the heavy lifting. He's never stopped. Right? So this is why you get out from under there, everything else is going to crush you, because now you have to support all of that. Right? When you're under the cross with him, he's supporting it. When you're not, good luck. All right, good luck. Because how many of you could do a walk with, I don't know, like a 200-pound log of wood on your shoulders? This is after the world has already beat you and spit on you and kicked you and shoved you down, scraped your knee. Here's this other thing. Now walk. Right? How can you do that? But instead, he takes all of that for us. Right? He takes the lashes for you. He takes the spit for you. He takes the yelling for you. He makes the walk for you. All he asks is that you come underneath it. Help bear it a little with him. And in exchange, you get to learn from him. In exchange, you get that closeness with him, that communion with him, that understanding that you'll never understand by yourself, that peace that no amount of candles or tea or whatever, bubble baths can obtain. Right? A relief that is impossible to find on earth. Promises that you cannot obtain, no matter how much work you put in. But if you're under there with him, it's all possible. It's all possible. Right? Because Jesus is doing the heavy lifting. Jesus is the one who already raised it up. Jesus is the one who's actually carrying the weight of the cross and the burden. The only thing you're doing is moving with him under it. The only thing you're doing is getting up close in personal time with Christ and learning directly from him. You're supporting his name. You're supporting his mission, but you're not supporting him because he doesn't need your support. You can't support him because even while under the cross, Jesus is still the one supporting you. Right? Our outlook under the cross is still, I need you. Right? Because if we're being honest, we need him to take that for us. We need him to take that pain. We need him to take that punishment. We need him to go through that because you wouldn't survive if you did. You wouldn't make it. You couldn't have made the march to Golgotha. You wouldn't have gotten there. But Jesus could have. And he already did, right? This is why this is a march of victory and nothing else. Because it's already done. He's not dying again, and yet you still have to be under that cross with him. But he's not going to die again. It's already done. It's already over. It's already finished. But the walk, your walk, still needs to be made. Your yoke still needs to be carried. Right? Your cross still needs to be bared. But when you're under it, right, when you're under the cross, you're going to feel the weight, but it's easy. You're going to feel the burden, but it's light. Right? You're going to get blood on you, but it's not yours. You're going to get jeered at, but they're not talking to you. You're going to get splinters, but you're not going to be nailed to it. You're going to be walking to death, but it's your victory. We need to understand what this is, because this is what this is. Right? People who don't want to open their mouths because I don't want to say anything, they're not talking to you. They never have been. You give a word, someone doesn't like it, they're not talking to you. It might seem like it's directed to you because you're under the cross with him, but they are not talking to you. They're not booing you. They're not trying to spit on you. But don't be surprised if you get hit. But it's not directed at you. So why are we taking it personally? Why are we acting as if this weight is only on us when it's not? Right? We're acting like we're getting killed, like we're getting beat, and yet the blood is his. And that's the best thing that you can have on you. And yet our perspective is so backwards of it all. This weight, this burden, this issue, right? You got a splinter, you got hurt. Oh no, but you didn't get nailed to it. But because he did, you won. This life, this walk, the weight that you need, the patience that you need, the effort that you need, right? The determination that you need, all of these things that you need, the victory's already there for it. You're not earning it. You're just getting to it. Right? The victory is already there. So where is your focus then? Right? So many people get dissuaded because they're focused on the crowd. Right? Just like Peter was with the ocean. I got all of this issues. I got all this church hurt. I got all this, that, and the other. Where were you looking? Right? If his head's here and you're looking over there, that's your first problem. Right? That's where it came from, because you weren't looking at who you needed to be looking at. Right? That's why Peter sunk. That's why we sink. We start looking at everything else. But where's your focus, right? John chapter 14, verse 28. You have heard me say to you, I am going away and coming back to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice because I said, I am going to the Father, for my Father is greater than I. If our focus is on Jesus, if our focus is on what he has already said and promised, then we should be rejoicing on this march. We should be rejoicing as we are shouldering the cross and not acting like it is us who is actually carrying it, right? We get so in our heads as if we have to do all of this effort to accomplish something that has already been accomplished. The victories in your life have already been written out. Right? The deliverance in your life has already been written out. The freedom in your life has already been out. The giftings in your life, the promises in your life have already been written out, and there is a day for them to come. But if your focus is on everything else, if you think you're the one who's actually going to accomplish it, you're not, because you're focusing on the wrong thing. Right? Freedom comes when your focus is on Jesus, not on the freedom. Promises come when your focus is on Jesus, not on the promise. Deliverance comes when your focus is on Jesus, not on the deliverance. All of these things come when our focus is on him and nothing else. And yet we get it in our head that there needs to be some extra effort. What extra effort? It's already been won. It's already been done. What extra effort? Submit yourself under the cross. Do all of those responsibilities that are entailed with it, right? Pray, read the word, seek God, try and be better day in and day out. And all of the victories will show up. They still need to be walked towards, but they'll show up. Life will still be jeering on the sides, throwing stuff at you, trying to distract you, but they'll still show up. If and only if your focus is on Jesus. Right? We can't act like this thing is on us, because it's not. There's nothing you can do to get God to move for you other than act in love towards him. There's no prayer that can be prayed. There's no sacrifice that can be made. There's no fast long enough. There's no sheep good enough. You could read the whole Bible in a day, okay? You know what he's going to say? You're making up for old time. He ain't going to be impressed. You can pray 8 hours a day. Oh, good job. You still missing, 3,462 others. But, right? There's nothing you could do except let him do it and be there with him in it. Right? Not acting like the full weight is on us. Not acting like we are the ones who are being killed. Not acting like this walk, this march of faith is a death walk for us when it is our march of and to victory. But if we don't fulfill the responsibility of staying under the cross, then of course we will fall. And we'll fall into this kind of thinking and feeling even if we don't verbalize it. And Matthew chapter 27, verse 32, right? Looking at another verse of Simon. Now as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross, right? God came and found you for this task. You are the Simon he found. You're the Simon he found to help carry this. But you should already know that, since he is the God that always finds the one. Right? That's in Matthew chapter 18, verse 12, and Luke chapter 15, verse 4. What man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? Right? You were the one that God set out to find. He wasn't looking for anyone else but you. And every time you try and scurry off, he'll come and find you. Do it enough, and like a shepherd, he'll break your leg, so you learn to knock it off. And then you'll complain that you got a broken leg, and that it doesn't feel fair. Oh well. That's all I can say to that. Oh well. If God finds you, which if you're in the house of God, he has, your responsibility is to bear this cross. There's a whole crowd of people, and yet Simon was the one picked out. You're the Simon that was picked out. Don't miss the opportunity to be under the cross with him. Right? Don't leave him under the cross by himself. Now, you were the 99. You were the one that he went after. But you are not the one who looks for and goes after the 99. Right? God is, and if you think you are capable of leaving the safety and security of the 99, you will find out very fast how easily the enemy picks you off. I just need people to know that you stay with the group. You are not God who goes out and looks for the 99. You're not, oh, God, I'll be right back. I just saw so-and-so get out from under their cross. No. Listen, yell at them from under yours. But if you think you're getting out from under yours to grab them and put them back under theirs, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Right? God found us not so that we can get ourselves lost again, but so that we can be under his cross with him. Luke chapter 23, verse 26. Now as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Syrian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. All right? Some of us aren't compelled or found for this walk, but seized and laid hold of for it, because you were born. Sometimes that's the reason. You were born for this. You were created with the explicit intent of walking this thing out, and being under the cross with him, of bearing this yoke, so that you can firsthand see the glory and victory of God in your life with the best seat in the house. And there's no better place for you to be than right next to Christ. If you want to see these things, you better be right next to him. If you want to experience the promises, you better be right next to him. If you want freedom, you better be right next to him. If you want healing, you better be right next to him. He's where it comes from. There's a reason why the woman with the issue of blood had to touch his robe. Can God send a word? Sure. But this walk in life isn't him sending a word to you. This walk in life better be you fighting to be there. She was able to. So I don't think anybody has an excuse to not be able to. And so you see the definitions? They laid hold of is that long word. It means to take in addition, to lay hold of, take possession of, overtake, attain, to rescue one from peril, to help. Right? They laid is obviously, you can see how the two words relate. To put or lay upon, to add to have put on, bid to be laid on, to lay or throw oneself upon. All right, that he might bear, Pharaoh, to carry some burden, to bear with oneself, to move by bearing. Of the mind, to be moved inwardly, prompted, to bear up, i.e., uphold, keep from falling, to bear, i.e., endure, to endure the rigor of a thing, to bear patiently one's conduct. Right? It doesn't matter how you came to the Lord, whether you were compelled, found, or laid hold of since birth. When God laid hold of you, he rescued you from peril. And the call on your life, regardless of origin, is to carry some of the burden of the cross. But that burden is light, because Jesus is the one primarily carrying it. But in the bearing of the cross, you must bear with yourself, meaning you have to be the one who is in control of, holding, and carrying your actions, emotions, and spirit. Right? God is not going to do that for you. He will help you, but he's not going to take your emotions from you just because they may be wrong. He's not going to take your thoughts from you just because they may be destructive. That's your responsibility. That is for you to bear. He's not going to just, well, if he didn't want me to do it, he should have just broken my legs or something. He's not going to do that. Your actions are your responsibility. They are your burden to bear. They are your cross to bear. Right? They are what keep you underneath that cross with him. They are the most important thing we do in this walk, is have control over ourselves. There are many people who know the scriptures in and out, backwards and forwards, who have zero control over themselves. Doesn't matter how many scriptures they can recite, when they get before God, they're still going to hell. There's not a quiz that you can take to get into heaven. There is not a test. It's whether or not you controlled yourself. It's whether or not you submitted yourself to God. It's whether or not you put yourself underneath that cross. Because only there does controlling yourself in all of these areas become easy. It's only there where it becomes second nature. Right? Because there is where, when we're learning from Jesus, we mimic him. Because no matter how old you are, no matter how old you get before you die, you're still a child. And all kids want to do is mimic their parents. When you put yourself under Jesus, you're going to mimic him. But only if you're there. You're not going to mimic him from afar off. You're not going to try and be like him from afar off. Why? Because when we're far off, we turn into one of the crowds. And yet, that's where we were removed from. There's a reason God does all things, and there's a reason Jesus didn't need anybody to help carry that cross. And yet there was a reason he called out this man from the crowd. And it's the same reason he calls out all of us from the crowd. Our responsibility is to bear this with him. This is our walk. And we can either see it as the walk that it is, which is a walk towards victory, or we can continue to lie to ourselves or believe the lie of the enemy, whichever way you want to put it, it's still true, and think that this is our weight, this is our cross, this is our effort, this is our this, that, and the other, when it's not. It never has been. Our responsibility is to be there. Right? Our responsibility is to show up. Our responsibility is to show up when he calls, to show up on time, to be always ready. Right? To be like, I don't know, that gag where someone calls for their aid and their aid's already there and they startle them. That should be your relationship with God. Right? You should just always be there. It's in the background, looming, right? Waiting for him to be like, hey, and you're just like, yep. He shouldn't have to go off to find you to tell you to do something. All right, again, we claim we want all these things, and then God has to then find you to provide the thing? I want healing. Well, why does God have to search for you to give you healing? How does that make sense? Right? You want this thing from him, and yet he has to go out looking for you to then give you the thing? No. This isn't Uber Eats or DoorDash or whatever. That's not how this works. You have to be there. You have to be under that cross. You have to be bearing that weight to get that thing. But again, that burden is light because Jesus is the one primarily carrying it. But in the bearing of the cross, you must bear with yourself. Right? Meaning, you have to be the one who is in control of holding and carrying your actions, emotions, and spirit. It is your responsibility to bear yourself, meaning to be in and have the right posture to carry the ease and light weight that is on you. Because many times you might think that you're carrying it properly, but because of your posture, it feels like it's crushing you. Fix your posture, and it's going to start feeling easy. Right? Get the right outlook, and it's going to start feeling easy. Too many times, you want to be carrying the thing, feeling like you're, why are you carrying it like a weirdo? And you can't maintain it, right? It's supposed to be on your shoulders, and you're trying to carry it in your arms, and now you're like, oh my gosh, my arms are going to fall off. Well, yeah, because there's a correct way to carry it, and you're not carrying it right. Right? You can have bad weeks when you've prayed more than you have every day that week. Why? Because you were praying from the wrong posture. You went through the week with the wrong posture. It doesn't matter that you are still bearing the cross. It was the wrong posture. And now you feel weak and tired and worn out. Well, yeah, you do. Because if I put a weight in your hand versus on your back, you're not carrying it as long. Nowhere close. So it's our responsibility to have that right posture. You could pray from a place of misery. You could pray from a place of doubt. You can pray from a place of fear. Is it going to do anything for you? No. Why? Because you didn't want to get out of the wrong posture to begin with. You wanted to pray from fear. You wanted to pray from doubt instead of praying from a place of victory. Instead of praying from a place of faith. Instead of praying from a place of hope. Instead of praying from a place of it's already done, you decide to pray from the opposite way and then, oh God, this is too heavy. Posture is your responsibility. You can't carry it however you want. You can't willy-nilly this. You're going to get yourself hurt. And I know you will, because I've gotten myself hurt. You've gotten yourself hurt. Everybody's gotten themselves hurt. Everybody got blown out backs and shoulders and wrists and hands and knees and ankles. We jacked up, right? We're a wreck, right? Because we carry it wrong. But when you carry it right, it's easy, right? It's lightweight. But this is why the definition, it talks about a physical, emotional, and spiritual bearing, because all of these things need to be bared, and they need to be bared by you, right? To be moved inwardly is bearing your spirit. To bear patiently one's conduct is your actions and emotions, but this is your responsibility. This is going all the way back to the beginning in Galatians, where it says you have to be responsible for your own load and no one else. All right, this is why I say I could tell you what to do, but unless you do it, it's not going to make a difference because you're responsible for it. All right, and yet, no matter how Matthew, Mark, or Luke says about the march we are on, it's a march to victory and nothing else. Right? When we get tired, refocus on Jesus. When you get exhausted, refocus on Jesus. When you get frustrated, aggravated, agitated, doubtful, fearful, apathetic, miserable, etc., refocus on Jesus, because if you are already under the cross, he's already right next to you. I mean, if you think about your deepest holes, your worst weeks, what was the solution? Was it an action or was it a refocusing? Right? It was always a refocusing. It doesn't matter if your solution was, oh, I went into prayer. Yeah, your prayer was probably finally focused in the right position. I finally did this. Oh, yeah, because it was finally focused in the right position. It wasn't the action of the thing. It was the refocusing on the person. Right? His yoke is easy and his burden is light because he's the one carrying it. Don't let yourself be fooled and think that it's actually you. And in conclusion, Luke chapter 9, verse 62. But Jesus said to him, no one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Right? The reason someone who looks back isn't fit for the kingdom of God isn't because salvation and forgiveness aren't available to them. It's because when you put down a weight, the longer you leave it, the less likely you are to pick it up again. And don't remove yourself from under the cross, and continue to remind yourself victory is at the end. And there's always, as long as you're alive, there's always an opportunity to put yourself back under it. Right? And it's not going to be as heavy as you think, because it never has been. And that's the word of the Lord.